Judy Halliday, who is a Senior Director of Commercial Engagement for UniQuest, which is itself a spin-out company from the University of Queensland in Australia. And Judy is going to be talking to us about the commercialisation of research incomes as evidenced by the 30-year journey undertaken at the University of Queensland.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to particularly thank the British Council and the Vietnamese Ministry of Education and Training for giving me this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about research commercialisation and the experience that the University of Queensland through UniQuest has had over the last 30 years. I was really pleased to hear David Priestley's comments around the length of time it takes for these journeys to first start and then finish. It's a little bit of a challenge all the time to manage the expectation of the timelines that might be involved from the conception of an idea to the crystallisation of something that actually turns into a product or a process that can be used by members of the community, be that our community in general or be that business and industry, small to medium enterprises and the like. So commercialisation in the university context, and as UniQuest sees it, has a particular definition which may not be the same kind of a definition as you would immediately think of. We tend to think of commercialisation as a process. It's the process that we use to manage the transfer of research outcomes from universities and institutions into products, processes, things that can be used in a broad market application. So as I said, it's a process of managing transfer to application. The questions that a university might ask itself about why it would be interested in commercialisation and why it would go on this journey are many, and these are just some of the sorts of things that are reasons for doing commercialisation. Surprisingly, perhaps, commercialisation is something that universities tend to enter into not because of the financial or potential financial gain, but because of other gains. Commercialisation is part of the process that universities engage in to meet with industry, to connect with industry, to help industry solve its problems, to help industry in its very broadest context. That industry might be, for example, government policy making and government department delivery of services, all the way through to the delivery of new types of engine components for Rolls-Royce. It brings to a university a lot of satisfaction on a number of levels. Our universities globally now are involved in benchmarking ourselves against one another in terms of the research excellence and research quality and output quality of education and those sorts of things. All of those benchmarking exercises at one point or another focus on what we call, in Australia at least, impact. What impact does the day-to-day activity of the university now have on our future, the future of our countries, the future of our people? It's all about engaging with industry, as I said, and getting economic benefit, not just for the university, but for the community in a broader sense. Another reason that universities like to engage in the activity of commercialisation is it does give you a funding stream that isn't necessarily tied specifically to particular grants or activities, and allows universities to explore some strategic initiatives that they might not otherwise be able to explore. But commercialisation is challenging. It's a very difficult road to go down, takes a long time, has many, many challenges, and universities are at the very, 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 very end of the process, or the beginning of the process, I should say, where the risk is very high, and the challenges that you have to get a product or a process into the marketplace are enormous and will take a long time, and also a lot of investment in money and time and effort and expertise from many, many partners. The problem that we also face in commercialising university research, particularly when you are at a comprehensive university like the University of Queensland, is we're talking about things that come from the social sciences, from the arts, from engineering, from bioscience and medicine, from ICT. All of these sorts of innovations that come out of universities have very different challenges associated with them, require lots of different expertise to move them from that very high risk area of the graph on the left-hand side to the actual area of the graph on the right-hand side, where you might be getting benefit in society or deriving income. There are many ingredients that are required for success of commercialisation of university outcomes and research outcomes. Obviously, you need to have innovation. I think it goes without saying that universities and research institutions are, by their very nature, innovative places. People are always thinking, solving problems, coming up with answers to questions, sometimes coming up with answers where the question isn't yet known, And that's a key thing that's important in going down the commercialisation pathway, is that you need to understand that there is a market, that somebody wants the answer to the question that you've solved. And you have to identify that market and work out how you're going to get there. You need to have a culture in your organisation that values and promotes entrepreneurial activity, that understands the challenges and the timelines involved. You need to have quite different skill sets of people involved. In our organisation, in UniQuest, most of our staff have a technical qualification to PhD level or above in at least one field, if not more than one field. A lot of our staff have a qualification, for example, in sciences and engineering, and then they may also be qualified attorneys, or they may have a business qualification. They've generally had experience in the business environment as well as perhaps an academic or government environment, and they know and understand what's required in order to identify, protect, and then take an idea from a university environment out to a product or process for the general marketplace. And as I said, you need lots of partners on this road. There are lots of different skill sets that you need to have access to and expertise that you need to have access to, a lot of which resides in your universities and research institutions, but a lot of which also is sourced from the business community, from small to medium enterprise, from large companies. It's a very, like most processes, quite a complicated and iterative process. It involves many stages, there's cycles in them, and there's eventually, at the end of the day, for the university at least, some sort of an interaction or deal with a potential industry partner or collaborator that'll take that idea or innovation out there into the broader world and develop it for some sort of use in the longer term. Perhaps the single biggest contentious issue in all of this, and where there's a real misalignment perhaps of objectives and desires, often comes in the form of the need for universities and research staff in particular to publish their work, whereas businesses and industry like to keep innovation and new steps forward in technology a little bit secret and quiet for a while. And really that's, in my day-to-day job, the biggest thing that I have a lot of trouble managing and balancing. So just a little bit more, I guess, about UniQuest and why the University of Queensland's made the investment over the 30-odd years in commercialising research and research outcomes. We were founded in 1984 as a private company. Our only shareholder is the university's holding company, UQ Holdings, and the organisation was structured with for a few reasons, but particularly because the university wanted to get together people with skills and expertise with a focus on business rather than a focus on academics and research. So our company has managed an intellectual property portfolio of more than 1,500 patents over the years. I'm not sure what the exact number is now, but it is quite a large number. And since 2000, we've spun out more than 70 companies. At this point in time, our portfolio of companies is around about 40. We have companies that we've only just spun out, most recently an agricultural technology company, which we spun out in August and got about $2 million worth of venture capital investment into, to some of the companies that we have an equity stake in, which are listed on the stock exchanges. So it's a pretty large portfolio of companies across a diverse range of industries and technologies. Those companies have, since 2000, raised more than $450 million for the activities that are undertaken in those companies. So that's an example of local economic development. Lots of SMEs that are spun out of universities, spin out and are incubated, I guess, in the local environment and perform all sorts of activities that benefit the local economy. We've also licensed a lot of our technology to various different companies for various different things, and each year approximately $3 billion worth of product sales contain a little bit of intellectual property or contribution of research outcome that came from the University of Queensland. I should point out that that doesn't mean to say the University of Queensland gets $3 billion, unfortunately. But I guess that's part of the university contributing to the wider economic development and local economic development in particular. UniQuest itself is ranked in the top 10% of organisations at universities that do technology commercialisation globally. We are, I guess, as David pointed out, we are an entry point to the university, which is a very useful and easy to access entry point for businesses and industry of all types to get to the access, the expertise of our university, which is considerable across many different fields. And as I've mentioned a number of times, this is a very complicated and difficult process. It takes a long time. And this diagram just sort of gives you an illustration of all the various touch points between the different partners and parties that are involved in a process that takes an idea all the way through to a product that someone might use. So it's a balancing act. You have to balance all sorts of different things. You have to balance for universities in particular, you have to balance the increased risks in dealing with commercializing intellectual property and research outcomes. And they're different risks to the risks that you might take in, enticing students, encouraging students, teaching students, and building the next generation of leaders in our community. So there's a whole raft of other risks and other things that you need to balance in this process, but they really centre around three key things. To commercialise research outcomes, you have to have projects, things that might be of use or of interest to the broader industry, to governments, to the community, and to big business. You need to have some understanding of place, understand where your university and where your technologies fit in the global and local context, and how you're going to develop the product through that very challenging valley of death, as it's known, to get something useful out into the community. Most importantly, you have to have people. You have to have people that are committed, that have the expertise and skill sets that you need to get these very embryonic innovations and technologies out of universities and research institutions into products and processes for wider use. So I won't go through in any detail some of the key questions that you might ask yourself when going through these key points, because I think those slides will be available online and people can have a look at those. What I will spend a little bit more time doing is going through some case studies and understanding, I guess, some of the things that have happened over the last 30 odd years for UniQuest and some of the projects that we've been involved with that have been successful or are nearly successful. This slide is deliberately complicated and I guess gives you an understanding of the requirement of collaboration and interaction and relationships and engagement that you have to have with many different parties, be they other universities in your own country and other countries, industries, finances, other part players, I guess, in the development of a product from its idea until it actually finds its way into the marketplace. But key and important are the people in the university environment that are entrepreneurs and that have done these sorts of things before. We're very fortunate that we've got a number of repeat offenders in our university who've not only innovated and developed one product or process, but have done it many times over. And they understand what's involved and are hopefully really engaged with the process, and usually the second time round it's not quite as painful as it was the first time round, although during the process they might disagree with that. So as I said, UniQuest's got a very substantial track record in a number of different fields. This is just a little bit of a summary from all sorts of different areas. Probably the one that we're most well known for is the Gardasil vaccine. That's the vaccine for young adolescents, young adults against the human papillomavirus. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a moment. Another one is the one that's down there on the far bottom right hand, if you like, of the slide there, bioplastics for packaging. That's all about sustainability and developing products and services that are sustainable and environmentally acceptable in our growing and global economy and environment. So now some examples, I guess, of some successful innovation that's come out of universities, and just to give you an indication again of the timeline and the challenges involved in getting these sorts of things out of the university and to the marketplace. A company called Fulltech was spun out of the University of Queensland in 2001 based on some intellectual property that had been developed by a PhD student in the IT and electrical engineering school at the University of Queensland, all about some neat engineering around developing little bits of componentry that protected against the effects of surging and changes in electrical current that went into various different things. Don't ask me about the details, I'm not really good on the details in engineering. But this program, I guess we protected the intellectual property through a patent in 1996. That patenting process went on and those patents are still in the process of either being granted or examined in a number of jurisdictions. Eventually, the spin-out company moved to the United States in 2004 and was acquired by a large US company called Bourne's in 2008. And that intellectual property is now used in things like cell phone base stations, data communication interfaces, and the like. But the key thing here is that this journey started in 1996 and the product didn't really make its way to market until 2008. Generally speaking, things in the engineering space make their way to market reasonably quickly, not as quickly as things in the ICT or IT space. App developers tend to work pretty quickly, and we have an incubator for developing ICT type applications called iLab, which is running a number of different programs for predominantly students, as it turns out, who are very interested and are very quick at developing new apps for all sorts of weird and wonderful and interesting things. The most recent success story out of that particular program is a company called Cartesian, which is using 3D printing to print electronic circuits on all sorts of different materials, from fabric through to metal and the like. But you can go online through Kickstarter and support their activities. It's a pretty interesting and very fast-moving environment in that space, as opposed to this, which took quite a number of years. Here's another example of, and quite a different example, is what which was started being developed in the 70s by this gentleman down here in the bottom right, Professor Matt Sanders. It's a piece of, well, it was originally a piece of intellectual property centered around some interventions and some workbooks and techniques that people could use to develop better parenting skills. And this program has been developed in the intervening period. It's centered around things like copyrights. There are no patents involved, and training. And it's a whole suite of tested and researched and proven interventions and activities that can be undertaken under certain circumstances, which improve outcomes in family dynamics. For example, things like children attending school, things like domestic violence, things like young childhood offenders. There are programs for all of these, and they've been developed and licensed through P International in 25 different countries around the world. There are some good data and good published data around how effective this sort of activity is in giving outcomes to the broader community. I mentioned the Gardasil vaccine for the human papilloma virus. We protected that intellectual property in 1995, 94, I think, no, 94 licensed it to CSL, which is an Australian company, who then subsequently licensed it to Merck. The first sales of the product were in 2006, so you can see again the very long timeline. This is a great example of something that research outcome that has fantastic impact. There have been more than 100 million doses delivered of the vaccine globally, and estimates of the lives saved range around the 100,000, 200,000 over time. It has an enormous impact on the local economy, on families, on development, on individuals, this particular invention that came out of Professor Ian Fraser's laboratory and Dr Jean Jou's laboratory. More recently, Professor Fraser has been involved in setting up the Translational Research Institute in Brisbane, which is a fabulous new research institute, partly funded, in fact, by Chuck Feeney and Atlantic Philanthropies. And I know that he invests a lot in education and research in Vietnam as well. So there are a number of collaborations that have happened as a result of that. But it's a terrific example of taking a research outcome, persisting with it for a very long period of time, and having a terrific benefit globally. Ground probe is another example of something from the mining engineering. It's a slope stability radar that was developed in what we call a CRC in Australia originally. But you can see it out there now in use in mines particularly. It's having a terrific effect, not only in saving lives, but improving processes and allowing more efficient extraction of minerals, and therefore having an economic benefit for some of the larger companies. Here's another example from the biotechnology space. This is a new pain treatment that's being developed by Professor Marie Smith originally. She's one of our repeat offenders. She has another product in development that's in phase 2 clinical studies at the moment. The company was spun out in 2002 after the intellectual property again was protected in the mid-90s. And when that company spun out, it then subsequently went on to have a number of capital raising activities and finally listed on the Australian Stock Exchange in May 2007. At that point in time, there were 9 people from our staff involved. It took about 11 months. There'd been about $10 million raised before the company listed on the stock exchange. There were 33 documents that had to be signed. There were 28 signatures on each document. It turned out to be a massively complicated and difficult process to get from a company that was a privately held company, venture funded, onto a listed company. But again, here's an example of how complicated and difficult this process is. This journey started in 1995, and all things being equal and the regulators and the clinical trials going well, a product probably won't make it to market until maybe 2015, 2016. So you really have to have the fortitude to start early and then stick at it for a pretty long time in order to get successful outcomes. Thank you.